Hey everyone, this is Donna Dracunis with the Sequential Arts Workshop session on Procreate and other tech. We're doing Procreate today, and we'll be doing some other tech in a few weeks, but we're going to do Procreate today. We're going to talk about perspective in drawing, and I've got some fun examples from comics for you and all different things. So we're going to start really simple because I know perspective is scary to me and to a lot of other people. So we're going to start with what is called atmospheric or aerial perspective. It's not necessarily like the view from the sky or anything like that, a bird's eye view or anything, but it's called, I like atmospheric, or sometimes I've seen a couple of artists call it linear perspective. In other words, there are no vanishing points. You may have heard of 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective. I've even heard of 5-point perspective, which broke my brain. But we're going to start with no points, no vanishing points. So these are the topics we're going to talk about today in how to get some depth and perspective in your drawings with none of those points and grid lines. So we're going to talk about positioning things on the screen or in your drawing. We're going to talk about color and value. Then we're going to look at specifically in Procreate and other digital art, how to use layers to create this stuff, which is different than a lot of traditional comics artists who draw everything, on one piece of paper. So we're going to use layers, and we're going to review it all together. The position, color, and value layers. We're going to review that all together. Just a little recap, and I'm going to show you some examples from some comics that I like. So we'll start with the position in the panel or the page. So the first thing is anything that's like a scene has a horizon line. Here we're first going to look at like landscape scenes. So the horizon line is, the horizon in nature if you're outside. If you're inside, it would be like where the floor connects to the wall, or where your table, when you're looking at I'm looking at my desk right now, this part would be my desk, and this part up here would be the wall behind my desk. But in landscape, it's the actual horizon. So when the horizon line is high up in the drawing, things look far away, just in general. So it looks like we're standing back from the scene. We can see a lot of it, and it looks like the mountains are pretty far away. When the horizon line is in the middle, you start to be entering into the drawing a little bit. Everything seems closer. It's lower down on the page, and it's bigger. So this is just the horizon line. When it's high up, it's far away. Middle, you're in the middle ground. When the horizon line is below the center of the page, you're really inside the drawing, and everything looks close to you. And of course, you'll see it's also bigger. So as the things come lower on the page, they usually also get bigger. So that's just one thing about position, is where the horizon line is. That makes sense? Okay. The other thing about position, go ahead.
I was answering your question. Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, okay. The other thing about position is where the objects are on the page. So this picture is a desk. Say this is a desk, and that's the horizon line, which is the edge of the desk and the wall. So the things that are lower down on the page, lower and bigger, seem closer to me, closer to you, the reader. The things as you move up and make things smaller, they look further away. So if it's high and small, it's far away. If it's low and close, it's near you if it's bigger. Also, you'll notice in this particular one, I did bolder lines on the things that are closer to me. So this is just an example with like a black and white landscape, just showing a little bit of shading. These big plants are closer to me, and the smaller version of them's in the middle. And then there's these little tiny little tiny trees in the background in the mountain. They're higher up on the page, so they seem further away. This plant here seems the closest, even though it's kind of, these both touch the bottom of the drawing, because it looks like this plant actually comes down lower. So it's even lower, even though the bottom of it is cut off. So what we're doing here, I don't know if you guys have looked at it conceptually before, but I'm sure you've seen it because we're going to look at a bunch of comics examples. But what we're doing here is creating an optical illusion, because we have a panel, or if we even have just a page, we don't always have a panel, but it's like we're looking in a window, and you know, that's what things look like in a window. And if it's further away, it actually looks like that. So you should just like look out your window and see the things that are further away. They seem higher up, and they seem closer to the horizon line. So this tree here is further away from the horizon line. It's closer to me near the bottom. So it's an optical illusion that we're creating just by where we're putting things on the page. So I think the horizon line in this one seems to be here to me, because those seem to be mountains in the background. So it's pretty low, and I'm pretty close into the page, into the drawing. This one's sort of in the middle, so semi-close. I'm not actually, I'm not backed up where I could see the whole desk. Okay, so where the horizon line is and where the objects are on the page, that's the positioning of things. So I have a couple of comics examples of this for you. So this one's from Dracula Motherfucker. And you can see here, the person's hand is in the bottom. It's bigger. I mean, it's as big as the guy. This hand, which is in the foreground, is bigger than the guy, because you get the feeling it's much closer. In fact, because of the positioning of it, it almost feels like you're the person holding your hand out there looking at him. So lower, higher, smaller, further away, and then there's not much in the background here because it's all in shadow, but as you go up, you go through that door, you're getting further away, higher up on the page. This one's from Snapdragon, and it's the scene of a desk. So the book is very close. This has more perspective in it because you're not looking straight on at the desk. We're going to ignore that part for right now, but the horizon line's kind of here somewhere where, like I said, where the desk and the wall meet. Okay, so the book is lower down, closer to us, bigger. This articulated skeleton is in the middle, medium size, higher up, probably close to where the horizon line is, and the lamp in the background is smaller, higher up. So you can see that the illusion is that that back corner of the room is further away from us. Both of these are kind of like looking out of your own eyes. Like it's almost like I'm looking at this, holding this book, looking over the top of it. So those are little small scenes like of the desk. These are outdoor scenes, bigger scenes. This one's from a book called Photographic, really cool book, all black and white. It's put out by Getty. It's about a photographer. So that's where the name came from. It's like a bio story. But here, the horizon line is, you don't really see it, but you can kind of tell that the ground ends somewhere here, and then there's sky. So that's the horizon line. This iguana is much closer to me because he's lower down on the page and he's bigger. These two people are in the middle, higher up. And then the background stuff is even smaller. And then in addition, it's not as drawn as darkly. So there's not really much black in that. The very fine lines and mostly gray, so it looks lighter. And then here, this is from Swamp Thing Twin Branches. The box, which is close to us, is bigger than the truck, which is further away. The truck, which is sort of close to us, is bigger than the moon, which is much further away. So just, if you're thinking about this, when you read comics, you'll see it all over the place. You'll see this kind of thing all over the place. So before we start the details, I just want to bring up the point that cheating is not cheating, okay? It's now thought that some of the famous artists in the Renaissance, like Vermeer, maybe Michelangelo in some cases, used a camera obscura to get perspective in their drawings. So if we cheat a little bit along the way, it's not cheating. That's part of making art, is using resources, reference photos, grids, examples, and so forth. So that's one thing. And the second part is, because we have photos now, it's not always important to get exact perspective. And like, Picasso said, who cares? He wanted to show multiple perspectives and things, but these are two Picasso landscapes. And you can see that, you still see that illusion that this is closer because it's lower on the page and this is further away. But the size of things isn't changing or anything else. But it's just, you just naturally feel like things lower down. It's because of where our eyes are located. And that's generally how things appear to us from our eyeballs. So, got any questions before we dive into some technical Procreate stuff? Okay, so that's just a little overview of what we're going to do. Now we're going to talk about color and value in this. Yeah, because when we were looking at this drawing, could see that it also has values. It's all grayscale, but in addition to what I was talking about, if things are closer to me and further away based on if they're near the bottom of the page or the top, the things in this drawing that are closer to me are darker. And then they get lighter and lighter and lighter as we move away. And that's the value. And then color, of course, is color. So every color can be done in different values, value being from light to dark. So here I've got some sets of 5 colors, blues from light to dark, reds or burgundy, whatever, magenta, greens, tans. And then this is just a grayscale pattern with 5 different shades of gray. So essentially, what we saw in that drawing is what's in the back or further away from us is lighter. When we look at the colors, it's desaturated, it's less saturated. What does that mean? When we look at our color wheel in Procreate, it has basically several different parts or functions here. I think most people use this wheel more than the other ones. So the outside of the wheel changes the hue, which means, blue, green, yellow, that's the hue. And saturation is going from gray to a dull color to a brighter, brighter, brighter color. So from left to right, we go desaturated to saturated, grayer to bright full color from left to right. And from top to bottom, we have value. At the top is the lightest value and the bottom is the darkest value. So when you go to the top and the left, which is where we double tap to get white, you get the desaturated lightest color. And when we double tap to get black, it's the desaturated darkest color. You can double tap other places too, like to get the most saturated lighter color, or the lightest color at a midtone. And there's 8 tap points, not just black and white. We usually use black and white, but any of those 8 corners you can double tap to get things. So what we're going to do is make an example here. Since I don't have purple, I'm going to do it in purple to show you what happens, or how I would do this. So make a new layer, and I'm going to go in just in my color wheel here, and I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to pick a light purple, and I'm going to move over towards the left, which is the desaturated side of the wheel. And I'm gonna, I picked a brush from Artist Pastels from Lisa Bardot. I like to scribble with her big oil pastel. It makes a nice solid blob of color. So there's my light purple, right? And we're going to try to get 5. And for each one, as we come towards the front of our drawing and the foreground of our drawing and the bottom of our page, we're going to go a little bit darker and a little more saturated. And we're going to try to get 5 colors that go a little darker and a little more saturated. That are, you can see the difference in each one. Now, 5 is not a magic number. You know, and it's just easy to see. So down and to the right, 5. So I think those look pretty good. But I want to show you a way to check your values to make sure that things look different enough. So what we want to do is we want to make everything here black and white so that we can just here, it's just really easy to concentrate on light, darker, 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 because we're not saying, oh, light, darker, oh, wait, it shifted more red. We're not thinking about that. We're only thinking about value. So to do that, you, at the very top of your document, you add a new layer. You go to your color wheel and you pick the middle gray. So double tap on the far left to get the totally desaturated middle and drag it into that layer. So now you've got a gray layer covering up everything. What you want to do is click the little N in the layer bar and go through the blending modes all the way down near the bottom to color. Now everything here is black and white. And you can see I didn't do too bad. This one's a little dark when I compare it to some of the other palettes I had. My light color is a little dark. So I might want to go and turn this off. And I might want to click and hold. Now I changed this feature. Normally, if you touch and hold, the color picker comes up. I changed it to be this box on the side because I tend to touch and hold things by accident when I'm using the screen. So we want to pick the color that we had there. And because it seemed a little bit too dark, I'm going to move a little bit to the left. Because remember, left is lighter, right is darker. You can kind of see that if you look at the color wheel. Then I'm going to drop the lighter, whoops, not on the right layer. I'm going to go back to my layer and drop the lighter color in there. And then I'm going to turn my color check layer on and I'm a little better, but I could still go a little lighter. So can you see that? What I'm doing there is I want to make sure, there's nothing wrong with it. On this column I had here, my lightest color was a little darker. You can go, you know, as far to white as you want for the light and as far to black as you want for the dark. And you can have 5 or 7, doesn't matter. 5 was just easy to deal with, as I said. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to try to make a drawing using one of these sets of colors. Now, I've already made a palette with them, as you can see here. When I made these, I dragged them into a palette, but say I hadn't done that. Instead of being on the disc, I would go to the palette section on the color picker. When I click the color, you have all these choices. Usually, most people work with the disc. We're going to look at the palettes now, and I'm going to go to the top and click plus and say create a new palette. And now I can load all these colors into the palette. So again, normally touch and hold activates the color picker, but I used the other thing, so I have to move it around. And then when I have that color, when I select it, it shows up here and I can click an empty box in my palette and add another color. So I can keep doing that. Use the color picker, select the color, it goes into the circle on the top and add it to the palette. And that's what I did down here with all of these and a couple extra ones. I added them and I made a palette of gradients, essentially. Make sense? Okay. So remember I said dark in that one we looked at, dark, foreground, bottom of the picture near you, light, less saturated, also cooler. The colors on the bottom will be warmer. So more shifted a little bit towards the red or orange. the colors in the background far away will be shifted towards the blue. And this is what happens when you look out the window, if you live near mountains or you look far in the distance. It's called atmospheric perspective, because that's the atmosphere is between us and what we're looking at. And the further away it is, the more of the atmosphere is between us and what we see, and it lightens it up and shifts the hue towards blue. So here's a piece I made in the daytime, and I'll show you the layers I have. I have a layer with these plants in the front, which is dark. And then I went a layer back with a bunch more plants that's a little bit lighter. I actually put a lot of colors in here, but in general, it's a lighter green than the front one. Then I made a house now, or this hut. You'll notice that because we're not talking about that perspective with the 1 point or 2 point, we're just looking straight on to the front of this little building, because we're not worrying about what if it's off to the side and things like that. That's what we'll be talking about next time. So we're looking straight on, but see, it's a little lighter. And then this layer with these trees is lighter. And then the background layer, actually, I made one layer of background that goes from darker to lighter as a gradient. So you can see what's happening there. And actually, it is shifting a little more to the blue. This stuff in the front's a little more to the yellow as well. See how that it's combining the position of the things on the page, the darkness of them, which is the value, and the color, which goes from warmer to cooler. And it makes it look like it's in the distance. And because this is so light, it actually looks almost foggy, because there's a lot of atmosphere between us and that. So this is what happens in the daytime. Here's something I found that people never talk about, is that it's the opposite if you want to draw the nighttime. So this plant and this bush of, bunch of plants here is exactly the same colors as it was in the one we just looked at. But instead of taking from that and going lighter, 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 I went darker, darker, darker. And now it looks like it's nighttime. So the things I'm closer to, I can see better. And yeah, the things further away from me just fade into the darkness. So that's all I did to change this from day to night, was I changed the colors of the things on the top of the page, and it's looking very bright on the screen. It looks even darker on my screen. This house looks very bright on what is coming across on from my camera. Let's go into, I'll select the layer of the house and I'll click the magic wand, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll make it darker. So now it looks darker to you guys also. Okay, see how that looks like night? And depending how bright you make these things in the front, it looks like there's a light near me, like there's a light on near me, and then it fades off, and maybe the moonlight is shining back there, creating a little light on the ground. But anyway, fade to light for day, fade to dark for night. Okay. Questions?
Yes, I do, Donna.
Good.
So,
Go ahead.
so what you're saying is that when you changed it from day to night, you went into the saturation button. You didn't go in and change each color. You used saturation to change it to night.
I used hue I did. You could change each
Okay.
color if you want, but what I did is I went into hue, saturation, and brightness, and I made them darker.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And I did that on each of the layers in the background, because it's just a quick way to change it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Donna, you mentioned the gradient, something you've gone over in previous episodes. Would you mind taking a little side trip down the gradient path?
Like to make these colors blend together?
You had mentioned, you showed us that I think that
The background here?
The background, yeah, the green, where it just goes from light to dark green, or vice versa.
This is so easy. This is so easy. I left a solid line where the horizon line is. So you can see this part is blended and this part to solid color, right?
Yes.
So what I did was I made a new layer. and I took the selection tool with rectangle. And I made some bands of color. So on the bottom, I used the dark color. Then I took another selection of a rectangle in the middle, and I put a medium color from my set of 5, not the darkest or the lightest. Okay. And then I took a selection of rectangle and I selected the whole area that had color in it now. You could also do that with automatic because it's all one, just solid blocks. So I could select those two with automatic. I didn't need to draw a rectangle about it. But at any rate, now that this part's selected, this part's not, because we don't want this to blend in. I just go into the magic wand and the motion blur. And I want this to be vertical because this is going to the sky. So I just go like that. Up is in the direction you want. So I want it to be vertical. So I'm dragging my pencil up and down. If I wanted it to be diagonal, I could, well, I guess it's not really going to go diagonal. I thought it would. That might be a different one. Perspective blur. This is motion blur. This is the one that works best for this motion blur. So now I have a gradient on the bottom. Now I still have this part selected. So if I click invert, now I have the other part selected. And what I did is I went up to my lightest color in that section and I plopped it in there. So now I have, this isn't as much different. You can't see the horizon line because this color is very close to that color. But if I zoom in, I think you could see where the separation is. So, but basically you put stripes of color on and use motion blur. And you don't have to do it with selections. You can take like colors and take a big fat brush. Let's see, turn a new layer on. You can take a big fat brush and paint colors on. And they don't have to be like similar colors either. You can, pick any colors you want. You put that on like that. And then you go into the magic wand for adjustments and motion blur, and you blur it. It makes a really cool gradient. So Photoshop and some other apps have this built in, but Procreate doesn't. So you have to make your stripes of color and use motion blur to create the gradient. Now, if I turn all my layers back on, has a funky sky in the background.
Really nice. Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, that's really useful, not just for that. There's other things you might want to use a gradient for. It just makes a nice color transition. It's nice for skies and other things. All right. So here's one I made, and I just want to show you the layers in it. I'm going to show you, this is what I did with one of those palettes. I went a little too blue here. You can see this is a little too cool, and this is a little warmer. That is, this is more blue and this is more yellow, but it still kind of works because this is lighter than this one. And in the real world, things don't get completely bluer in the background. If the sun was shining on this, it would be warmer. And if this was in a shadow, it would be cooler. But again, I just have the layers set up and I can do the same thing. I pre-made a layer here. I made a solid gray layer and I set the blending mode to color. If I turn that on, you can see that my different shades of gray. So I messed up here a little bit because this is darker, then it gets lighter, then it gets darker, then it gets lighter. But it still looks, fairly like a landscape and like things are moving away from me. So depending how persnickety you are, you might want to change these colors to be more in a match with what we set. So if I look at my layers, the first one's okay, that's pretty dark. The second one is maybe a little too light. So I'll go to my second color here and drop it in there. And then for this layer, I'll use my palette that I already made and tested. And as I go towards the back, you'll notice the layers are upside down. To me, they're upside down. The thing that's in the top layer that's closest to me has to be in the top of the layer list, but it's in the bottom of the picture, near the bottom of the picture. So that always throws me for a loop. To me, the way I have to stack the layers seems upside down. So I'm going to go to my last one there, and I'm going to pick my lightest green color and drop it in. And now that's more accurate for what we explained in what we were looking at. So that's super simple, right? That's just the flat areas. This is essentially the same thing, right? I just added a bunch more details with it. I have this brush set. This is crazy. It's called Ghibli from the movie production studio, and it's got all kinds of plants and leaves and clouds and textures. And I used these brushes to add a whole bunch of stones and leaves and trees and things in this picture. So the same basic rules apply. Darker in the front, gets lighter towards the back, right? And then it doesn't have to be color. This is not just solid grayscales, but I used the halftone filter in Procreate to turn it into textures. So you can see it's got like patterns on it. Same thing, gets darker, lighter. And then here's one I just did by painting with random texture brushes that I found in my folder. So this doesn't only work if you're making color comics. It works totally great if you're making black and white comics as well. Same basic rules apply. And it doesn't have to be monochrome. So see this picture I found on the internet? It follows mostly the rules that we've been talking about. Things in the closer to us are pretty dark, pretty saturated colors. They're near the bottom of the picture. The water's in the middle. It's a big thing. So it's getting lighter as it gets further away from us, even though it's one big object, one big lake or river. But as we get further away, the water's getting lighter. And then these trees and hills in the back are lighter. And even here, you can see from this one, which is closer to us than this one, we're getting lighter and lighter. So again, same thing with the color checker. If I turn on my black and white thing to check the values, I can see that the darker things are mostly in the front. Now, here's a little cheat because, you know, the water, this artist wanted to be really dark, the water like that. And so these plants are actually a little bit lighter than the water, which is behind them. But they're darker than the stuff that's in the far distance. And because they're a different color, colors have things like that. Things of different colors, like the blue things will seem further away. Red will pop out like it's closer to us. I don't know all those rules about how your eyes work with colors, but I know that in addition to the values, the colors themselves will look further away and closer. Maybe because we need to be afraid of blood or something, the red really pops close to us.
I think it has to do with temperature. I think warmer temperatures are also closer.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the wavelength of the light, which is what makes it change from warmer to cooler temperatures. Yeah, but anyway, it doesn't, the same rules here, the same guidelines or basic things, these things in the front. Notice how there's two plants here on the sides that are close to us, and this tree is also close to us. Remember what I said before? This plant looks really close because even though it ends here, you can tell that the plant actually, that's not where the plant goes into the ground. This plant actually, you know, probably goes into the ground like outside of the frame. So it looks really close to us. Okay. So what I said about the layers, this I mess up every time, so I'm going to show you it really detailed here. What's in the front in the picture, meaning closest to us, right? What's in the front in the picture, it's closest to us, is the top layer. What's in the back in the picture, that's furthest away from us, is the bottom layer. So they seem backwards to me, but that's how it works. I mean, this is not something that you have to memorize. You'll figure it out, right? So if I take that away and you see my real layers palette, if I had put this light blue mountain that's in the back, if I had put it on made it in the front, well, it would block everything else out. So I have to move it down in my layer list so it goes behind those things. It just kind of messes with my brain because in my drawing, I'm looking at it from the bottom to the top, and in my layers panel, they're stacked from the top to the bottom. So I have to always think about and move layers around because they're not in the right place. So if you have a layer that's not in the right place, you just click and hold it, and you can drag it up and down in the layers list. And the higher you bring it in the layers list, it's like if it was a pile of things on your desk. The one that's on top of the pile is on the top of the layer list. So there is logic behind it. It's just when I'm doing this particular kind of drawing, it confuses me because I'm thinking in a different way. But like I said, you can always move a layer until it goes where you need it to be. Just click, hold it, and drag it in the list where you want it. And you can also add black and white to your colors, because what we're doing in the values is getting closer to white for the lights, closer to black for the darks. So you can go all the way to pure black and pure white if you want to. Okay, should we draw one? Should I draw one so you can see what happens and how the layers kind of confuse me sometimes? I already made a bunch of blank layers in here because I know I'm going to need them. This is a photo I got off the internet. This person pointed out 7 colors in this photograph. And if you look at nature photos, you'll see this, you'll see that the things that are closer, and look, they're on the sides. Why? Because we're looking for a scene. And if we were looking straight at that tree, we wouldn't see the other stuff in the background. So that's why you see things framed like this a lot. It's because of the viewer, the reader, or me taking the photograph, is looking between things so we can see what's in the distance. So they marked out 7 colors that they saw in this. So I'm gonna start with, and this is what I always do. I'm gonna start with these big trees, and I'm gonna leave this picture up just in the corner of my drawing. And I'll get rid of that. And I'm gonna start at the bottom because this is what I always do. And I have, going to start with the darkest. I may as well use the green colors, green and blue colors, because that's what's in that drawing. And I have this brush called a quick pine brush. That's part of a set from Calvin at Drifter Studios. It's one of his watercolor sets. Maybe it's from his Alpine set, or it might be in his regular watercolor set. And what it does is you just go like that, and it like makes pine trees. Okay, so I am going to say that's kind of like a pine tree. So I'm going to go there and go over it a couple times. There's that tree. And then there's a tree here that's more, a little bit back further. So those are the 2 things that are like in the foreground in this picture. So I put them there. Now I have them. Now this is what I do, and this is how I remember that the layers have to go in the opposite order. Because I see here that there's this main area here, and I think of like this as one hill or front range of the mountains. So this area here is one hill, and so I'm going to go to my next lighter color in my palette of greens that I saved before. And I'm going to draw it all the way across because it's going to go behind those trees. So I'm going to go, whoops. I have to go to a regular drawing brush. I do this stuff all the time. I forget what brush I have. I forget what layer I'm on, all of that. Okay, now I'm gonna try to draw on this layer, turn it on with this drawing brush, and I've picked my second color, and whoops, it's in front of the trees. So I usually just draw a line and then drop in the color. But yeah, now it's in front of the trees. And I go back to my layers list and I'm like, oh yeah, the trees have to be at the top. And I have to go from the top to the bottom in my layer list. I always start on the bottom and I have to switch it. So, but it's pretty obvious when it's wrong. So now we have this hill, this mountain here that goes to the side. I'm going to combine these two. You can see there's two little ones here that are similar. I'm going to combine them into one hill that's on that side. So I'm going to go to my one. I'm going to take my next color. I'm going to go to my next layer. Now that I realized I was doing it backwards, I'm going from the top to the bottom in the layer list. I'm going to draw the shape of that and drop my color in. So I didn't use a totally solid brush for drawing, so it leaves a little texture at the edge. If you want it to be totally solid on the edge, you can use a monoline brush or a flatting brush. I talk about a flatting brushes a lot for comics drawings. You can find them if you Google it, flatting brush. But anyhow, so we're going to keep going. So here is a hill that slants to the left. So we have this front one, the second one that I combined together. Now we have this third one. So I go down another layer. I take my brush, make sure the layer's on, and I draw that shape. I'm trying to draw a closed shape there, not just drawing the line like that, because then I can just drop the color in. Whoops, I forgot to change to my lighter color. Then go one color lighter. Something I did wrong here. Oh, there we go. Now I got the lighter color in that hill. So you can see I'm getting lighter and a little bit bluer. And then in this picture, there's one more far distant mountain range. So I'm going to pick my lightest color. Now here's another thing to watch. I'm going to add another layer. And when I click plus, well, the next layer comes up above, but I need it to go below because I need to stack my layers from top to bottom as I go from bottom to top in my drawing. So I had to drag it down. And now I'll go here. Whoops, didn't pick my lightest color. To pick my very lightest color, go back here, make my distant mountain range. I'm going to come all the way around and make it a closed shape. Drop my color in. Turn off the little reference photo. And now I have a little landscape like that. I mean, it doesn't look very realistic, but it has things close to me, things far away. I could also go into these layers and go to like a little tree brush that I have and say I'm on this one here in the middle. So let me find that layer. Okay, I'm on that layer. I want to add trees to it. So that was my middle color. Okay, if I try to draw trees on a middle color, they're invisible because it's the same exact color. So I can, at this point, go to my disc and go a little bit darker. And then I can put some trees on. And I can decide, how much darker I want to go to make them look like what I want them to look like. So, and I can do that on all the layers. And then obviously the further I go, the trees will get smaller and smaller. Biggest tree closest to me, far away. So that's how to build a little scene like that. You can put more stuff in the front in the darker color, like on the layer with the trees. I can just draw, just for an example, anything you draw like that goes off the bottom is going to look really close. Now my lines all cross each other, so I have to, fill it in. But see, anything like that's going to look really close because it looks like the bottom of the plant is way down here somewhere. I mean, that could be a blade of grass that's right in my face. I mean, I'm an ant looking at this scene. So. Any questions about that layers? It's pretty simple when you, it's pretty simple to think about it. I just always get it backwards and have to switch it. Here, this is cool. So this is the photo. This works for cities too. These are just some pictures I found on Google. There's trees and little houses or factories or something here. And then notice as you get further back, even though this is a city, the same thing happens. It gets lighter and bluer. And so you can draw cityscapes the same as you can draw a nature landscape. So this works for any kind of scenes that you want to do. And again, you can make it as simple or as complex as you want. So this is something I drew for one of my comics that I wanted to look really like lush. And here's a simplified version of it. I changed the grass in the front to just this one leaf of a plant, and I left out a lot of stuff. So if you have a page in a comic that you have like a really big panel or a full page and you're setting the scene, you might want to add a bunch of details like this. But then when you come and you have, 6 more panels in the same location, you might want to simplify it like this because you don't have 4 hours to work on every panel, right? And so depending how much you simplify in between, you can make it a lot easier. And you may not want like that kind of detail anywhere in your comic for your backgrounds. I mean, and that's just something that you decide as what's your style for drawing comics. So here's like just a review. I said we'd have a review. So what's far away is light. It's desaturated. It's not very bright color. I didn't write that it's cooler here. It's a cooler color. So it shifts towards the blue. It's high up on the page. And it's near the horizon line. So the mountains are near the horizon line. They're behind it actually. But this little character here is near the horizon line. She's high up on the page. She's desaturated. She's small. And there's not that much detail on her. So she looks far away. And then when it gets closer, it gets darker. Even on I used a kind of gradient on here. Darker, more saturated, lower on the page, further away from the horizon line. And what we're looking at is where the bottom of the thing is. I mentioned that on plants, but what makes her look far away is where her feet are, not where her head is. Her feet are way down here. So she's almost out of the picture. She's at the very edge, right at the bottom. So she's large and she's got a lot of details. So I put her in here from somewhere else. And so this bothers me. So I'm going to fix it. Her eyes turned green because, oh, well, maybe I can't fix it. I don't know. I shouldn't worry about it, but I hate when my characters like come from another place and then their eyes turn green because I don't color the eyes because my other drawing had a white background, and this drawing doesn't have a white background. I'm going to show you something I did here. And I just messed up something in this drawing. Oh, okay, background. I want to show you something I did here with gradients too. That's interesting. So when I was drawing this, I drew this road. Just like that with one color and one brush. And then I said, well, I want it to get darker as it comes to the front. So I made a gradient layer and I selected clipping mask. So my gradient layer, let me go back and set it all to normal and everything. Normal. I made this gradient layer. So that looks just like what we did in the other one, right? I put a rectangle of dark on the bottom, a rectangle of light up here. I used motion blur. And that gradient layer is above my road in the layers palette, so I can click on the picture or the left edge to bring up the menu, select clipping mask, and now the gradient is locked inside the road. So now my road gets darker in the background, darker in the foreground, lighter in the background. I used the exact same layer. I copied it and pasted it, or slide left, duplicate. I made another copy of it. I moved it down here and I said, I want this to be clipped to this grass I wrote. So I made it a clipping mask and I changed the blend mode to luminosity because I didn't want to just let it turn. I mean, if I left it on normal, it turned the grass brown because the layer is brown. So even though the clipping mask's on, it just turned it just blocked out the grass with the brown. But you can go through the layer blend modes and it does all different things. And of course, luminosity means how bright it is. So it could be called value, luminosity. So where my gradient was lighter, my grass stayed lighter. Where my gradient was darker, my grass got darker. So that's just an overview of all the bits and pieces we talked about. Further away, lighter, desaturated. And remember, that's in the day. At night, you would make the stuff in the back really dark. But high up, near the horizon line, small, little detail. That's what's in the distance. Close, dark, saturated, low on the page, large, detailed. And it makes an optical illusion. And so you're getting some perspective and depth without having to draw, you know, any of those grid lines and things. So we got a couple, I just want to blip through and show you what to look for. Things to look for when you're reading comics. This is from that one I mentioned before, Swamp Thing. See how it has the things in the front? Now it has a branch coming out the top, but it looks like it's in the front near me because it's really dark and because it looks like it's coming off a tree whose way, you know, the trunk of the tree is way down here. So that's a cheat, like a little extra thing you could do. But we have the foreground dark, the midground a little bit lighter, and then in the background behind all those trees is a little house, very light, very bluish. Of course, this whole thing's green because that's the color scheme of it. Same thing here, where I said you have these things in the front that are very big, very close to us. And like I said, a lot of times they frame the picture. The characters in the midground, and then just not really anything super far away in this, but you could say the house is the background, but see how it's dark? There's a light shining on them, but this is at night, so everything is dark in the background. This is from that photographic book, close-up stuff, framing the image. Not necessarily dark, but more detailed, bigger lines. More detailed, you know, darker lines. In the middle, less detail. And in the background, there's not even any black. It's lighter. It's drawn with gray lines. So there's no black at all in the things that are in the distance. This is from Nick Nevin and the Bloody Queen, I think is the name of it. Foreground. And this is sort of at night or maybe at twilight, I'm not sure. But the foreground's very dark, almost like a silhouette. Midground, and then the sky in the background. This one's interesting. It's from that same book, because it's not a tall picture, it's wide. So you see that a lot in comics and movies. This stuff's in the front. The middle car, it's up higher on the page, it's smaller, but it's not necessarily lighter color. But the things in the background are definitely less detailed and lighter color. So like I said, if you look in your comics as you read them, you'll see a lot of this. Same thing here, foreground, midground, background, lighter, higher up on the page, horizon line, and so forth. This is another interesting one. This is from Something's Killing the Children, another wide one. You might not think to throw in something like this. This is a tree really close to you, but it sets the distance to the mid-ground people and the background stuff. Again, the trees themselves are a little bit lighter in the background, but you can see the darkness, either night or the darkness of inside the forest that breaks out in the far background. So because we're not just looking out at mountains, the trees, the forest itself makes it dark. But I thought this was a really interesting way to add depth and distance to this image. Just this piece of tree, the bottom of the tree is way off the page. Is probably, I'm standing very close to this tree and they're quite far away from me, because look how small they are compared to the tree. Same thing, foreground, middle ground. This has a little bit of 1-point perspective or 2-point perspective because of the buildings. So we'll get into that later, but darker, middle, lighter as you move up the page further away. So you guys, if you look, and depending on, I wanted to show you these because depending on the art supplies and the media that people use, some of those things don't show as much and what the picture is. So here we obviously have detailed big things in the front, less detail in the middle, and less detail in the back, but it's all fully saturated color. So because of the way this person is drawing it. And then also this is very warm yellow because it's like a hayfield, and this is green grass and stuff. So sometimes the what you call local color, the actual color of the thing, if you're using that actual color of the things and that your palette is a saturated palette, you may just use those colors, but they still use the other parts, which is lower down on the page, is closer, has more detail, etc. So sometimes people don't use all of the things we talked about. This is from Speak. It's illustrated by Emily Carroll. Anything she does is fantastic. So foreground, darker, lower on the page, although the horizon line here is probably around here. So that's a little bit of breaking that rule. But obviously this is closer to us. It's bigger, it's darker, it is low on the page. This is a little further away, even though their feet are the same level, it looks further away because they're smaller and there's not as much detail. And in this page, they're kind of grayed out. They may be in a shadow, or she may have just grayed them out because they're further away, because these people are even further away and they're darker gray. So it could have been a shadow, or it could be just something she was doing to make these pop more. You see them more, black lines on white, and as they get grayed out, you see them less, so they recede. Anyway, that's all about that. And next time we'll do 1-point perspective. So any questions before we wrap up?
Thank you, Donna. This is really helpful.
I think it's super fun that you can create like some depth and distance without having to deal with all those grids and vanishing points and all of that, because we don't always have time or inclination to mess with that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Donna, I really appreciated this. I really liked how, because when you were doing your how to do it, I was doing one too.
Oh, cool.
All along with you, so I can go back to the recording and check to make sure. The other thing I was thinking of, it's such a good, like when you were saying you don't need all the perspective lines, and I usually have it with me, but it's I think it's called 22 positions. It's like close up, far away, to the left, to the silhouette. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh
yeah, I don't know that specifically, but I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was looking for one that somebody in SAW gave us, but I thought I'm going to use that to go through what you have taught us, because because it's in black and white. So yeah, so thank you for this.
This book I have, there's all kinds of books like this, and you can go way over, but I love this book, How to Drawing Action Scenes and Characters by Shikata Shiomi. It's a manga book, but I really love it because it shows all these things from different perspectives, and you can see those things, like how to tell, and they explain how to tell what's closer, what's further. And this goes into more like, are you looking from the top or are you looking from the bottom? There's a lot of stuff that's even over my head in this, so I'll be studying this for a long time. I find sometimes manga tutorials are really useful, even if you're drawing in a different style, because they really like pull out the concepts of what they're doing.
Can you repeat the name of the that book that you just showed?
Sure, it's Drawing Action Scenes and Characters, and the author is Shikata Shiomi. I don't know if you could see that. Trying to zoom in on the.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I really like this, and I'm not going to draw action scenes, but you know, I'm not going to draw like fights and stuff, but it still has like, it has really a whole section on composition and, you know, what in perspective and all of that. So anyway, Betsy said this was similar to what Justine taught in the year-long program. Good. It's nothing that I invented. It's just,
Yeah, I love having yet another, layer of this is how you do it. And I'm psyched that, she didn't go over the thing about, we had the dark, the distance fading out into getting more and more atmospheric and light.
Right.
But that idea of switching it for the dark, that's like a cool new
idea.
Idea.
Nobody ever, I haven't seen that in any classes that I've taken,
Yeah.
but I noticed it looking at pictures. So I just wanted to point it out.
Okay.
We don't have, that's the only way I could figure out how to make things look like night. And I've seen drawings like that. But it's never part of the lesson. So yeah. Okay, well, great, you guys. Thanks for coming. We'll get this video up and we'll do more perspective for 2 or 3 more sessions.